Uganda would become the new Israel. The similarities and chastisements in the biblical apocalypse cannot be denied, especially Matthew 24, 29 to 31. There's just, again, like you said, kind of like in your comparison of the flood, Jesse, it's the same. They're just pulling shit of the Bible, changing a few words, retooling it, and then shipping it as a new product.
This is like when the emperor was like, what if I make a second Death Star? It's the exact same thing.
Same exact thing.
Yeah, he's like, fuck water. This time we're doing like a hell thing. Like, fuck water's out. We're cleaning it up. You guys gave me the idea because it's good shit. I'm going to fucking slurp everybody's shit off. Like, it's just like the same shit, though. It's
exactly the same shit. And it's still like, even though I know there was a lot of religious shit happening, it's still crazy how many people pulled in. And we'll talk about that. With a doom date set, the tortures of the earth explained, and a gusto to find new members, recruiting officially began. Cults usually, and when we talk about more cults in the future, which we will, you'll realize that cults thrive on a very certain subset of people. And as I kind of said earlier, they're the vulnerable and the desperate. And I don't mean the desperate in like a derogatory term, just people who are at just rock bottom, looking for anything to give them a hand and help them.
I've seen people even get suckered into like, I don't want to say suckered in, but like people get really into a religion that's not necessarily a cult, or is like a very extremely, what would you call it? Like aggressive version of a religion, just because they're just looking for like a rope to like climb out of their life on, basically.
Mm-hmm. It's exactly that. I just want to be clear. Like I don't mean vulnerable and desperate, just in a negative context.
It's not like you're weak, so you fell for the cult.
Yeah. It's just cults thrive on those kinds of people because they pretend that they can provide answers and closure. However, the movement was slightly unique. I say slightly because it's not the cult. It's not the only cult that's accomplished this. But yes, while it had its fair share of vulnerable and desperate people, it was also made up of exploited poor, extremely rich, as well as well-off Ugandan politicians. So this cult had a giant smorgasbord of people across the spectrum.
How many people are we talking?
We don't have specific numbers, but in the early days, somewhere around 50, 60, probably.
50 to overall. 60? And they got 60 people, 1,000 kills?
10 years from this point on, yes. Okay. Like we're just in the early days of the cult at this point. Moreover, they're particularly targeted those beset by AIDS by the movement, with a promise that was almost too good for them to ignore. If you had AIDS and joined the movement, then you were made two promises. One, guess what? God's gonna fucking heal you. Congratulations. You are gonna be healed of AIDS. But two, if you joined and had AIDS, repented, but died anyway, well, don't worry that God didn't get around to healing you. Because since you joined and you repented, you get a ticket that goes right to heaven. No purgatory or judgment or any of that nonsense. God forgot to heal you, so off to heaven you go. It's part of the package. For the movement, this was kind of a diabolically genius move.
Oh, it's diabolical is correct. That is correct.
Because as it fills seats and gets more bodies, you got to remember that this was at a time where coming forward about having AIDS was heavily looked down upon and very harshly judged. So if you thought you even might have AIDS, but were too nervous or ashamed to see a medical professional, joining the movement for some was the next best thing. If you thought you hadn't, but didn't and joined the movement just in case, and you lived, God saved you. God healed you, and that was evidence. And if you did have AIDS and joined and died, at least you know you get to go right to heaven. It was evil as shit. And by all accounts, the movement was excellent at recruiting, if a little aggressive, using every single tool available to them at that time. The first people brought in were who else but initial members, friends, and family. From there, face-to-face preaching was a favorite tactic, as well as pamphlets that were mailed through the post. Tape-recorded messages left for people was another favorite way they got their message out there. It should also be noted just how aggressive these recruiters ended up being, more often than not, bordering on harassment of those that they targeted for recruitment, going so far that if you were denied, they would threaten chastisements upon you endlessly. And if they were able to recruit your family but not you, then you would likely never hear from your family again, as you were immediately labeled a demon. With the recruits happening and the occult life officially starting, training needed to happen. As one joins a cult, the tool that all cult leaders have is control, brainwashing, reprogramming, and living to a strict schedule. Once you were recruited, you would be moved to the movement's initial headquarters and would be abandoning your own family, land, house. This implied that you could sell your own property, and most of the time, the movement was the one that ended up gaining the proceeds. However, there were occasions when the movement preached Jesus' New Testament teaching of abandoning everything and follow me, which implied that if things went poorly, then you could return to the land of your ancestors. So simply you give up everything. If you lose it all, at the very least, you have salvation.